the ILSA Diplomacy Days. It's officially 4:30, so let's begin. Before we begin, we will first like to introduce ourselves as your moderators for today. My name is Sofia Sporn Olivares. I'm 21 years old and I'm from Mexico. I'm a second-year European and International Law student, and I'm an ILSA ambassador.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gustavo Jimenez, and I am 24 years old. I am from Peru. I am a second-year International and European Law student at The Hague University. I would also like to welcome everyone that is also watching us from the live stream on YouTube. We are very, very excited to be closing the last day of ILSA's Diplomacy Days with such an amazing guests. This event was planned and organized by the International Law Student Association, the Hague Chapter.
ILSA The Hague Chapter is a study association within the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and more specifically within the International and European Law Program. The purpose of the association is to promote the study, profession, and development of international law. Such goal is achieved through the different efforts of ILSA supporters and members. Indeed, ILSA works with different subgroups which organize events, workshops, and projects. These groups are the Main Event Committee, the Social Event Committee, and the ILSA Committee. Now, moving on to officially starting today's event, just quickly for our attendees, we would like to tell them how today's event is going to proceed. First, we will engage in a dialogue with the Deputy Ambassador and the Third Secretary of South African Embassy here in the Netherlands. In particular, on their life as diplomats, their career, advice, and general topics of South Africa, and in the presence of the international ambit. We would like to warmly welcome our honored guests of today, Deputy Ambassador Ms. Levelo and Third Secretary Political Mr. Hendricks, both former lawyers with extensive knowledge, insight, and a variety of expertise on what working for the South African Embassy is and representing South Africa looks like.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Deputy Ambassador. Oh. Yes, sorry.
I was just saying thank you very much for the warm welcome remarks.
Oh no, thank you to you, Mrs. Deputy Ambassador, Mr. Secretary. Thank you very much again for accepting our invitation. We are very honored to have you here. We are looking forward to learning more about your journey. First, we would like to hear from Mrs. Levelo some introductory remarks.
Okay, thanks very much for the invite, and thanks to the university as well as the student organization to look into us and invite in the South African Embassy. We feel honored to represent our embassy. Oh no. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Has vanished.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's going on and off. We feel very honored to invite us to this platform. In brief, let me introduce myself. I'm Olita. My surname is Levelo. I'm a Deputy Ambassador based in the Netherlands. I'm going now for my third year, but 2 years and 4 months being in the Netherlands for now. It has been a good experience based on the previous placements that I have. My background remarks, it will be, I am a qualified law student, qualified lawyer, who previously worked at the Department of Justice as a state attorney, a prosecutor, and I later joined the Foreign Services. I have served in different countries, amongst others, countries in the Middle East. The last posting, in short, was in Brazil. And then here I am in the Netherlands. And in the Netherlands, what we deal with in my section, mostly because we have other colleagues as well, we cover our relations with the Netherlands, that is also including the Antilles, the Curaçao and Saint Martin. And also we cover, amongst others in the relations, we cover our own bilateral, that is also political. We cover as well as our trade relations, your arts, culture, sports, and so forth, education, and so forth. And this is what we deal with in the short remarks. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you for all that information, Mrs. Lovelo. Now, we would like to start by asking a few questions regarding your roles within the embassy. If we can first start with Mr. Hendricks. Please, Mr. Hendricks, can you tell us what does your role as Third Secretary Political entail? Following this, Ms. Lovelo, can you also tell us more about your role as a Deputy Ambassador?
Yes, Gustavo, thank you. Thank you very much. This is my first posting. I consider myself to be a young diplomat, having entered our foreign ministry about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I worked at a law firm in Johannesburg in South Africa, but I'd always aspired to become a diplomat. And when I was back at the foreign ministry, I essentially started off dealing with bilateral relations with some European countries, and then from there went into at the multilateral desk, where I served the issues on the agenda of the third committee of the United Nations General Assembly. And I was then fortunate enough to be posted to my first posting, as I've mentioned, here to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And Mr. Lovelo and I arrived more or less the same time. And I work in her team, essentially in the bilateral relations division within the embassy, and have a really broad portfolio. I think especially you are a junior diplomat, third secretary, first secretary in an embassy, you get exposed to all aspects of the mission's work. So, for instance, I'm very much involved in education, promoting linkages between Dutch tertiary institutions and South African institutions, and also sourcing scholarships, for students from South Africa to come and study here, and essentially just managing the relations that we have in the education sector. I also deal with public diplomacy, which is essentially what this is, where we communicate, the foreign policy of South Africa, our values and core beliefs, and of course also what we seek to achieve through our embassy in this country. In addition to that, I also deal with trade and investment matters and assist Ms. Lovelo there with managing relations with the various companies that are in the Netherlands, both Dutch and South African, because the Netherlands is a very important trading partner for us. It is, of course, as you know, the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world. And a lot of our fresh produce and citrus products are shipped to the Netherlands, where they processed and re-exported to other countries. So that's a very, very important sector for us, including the wine sector and a host of others. Then also I deal with matters relating to just generally our relations, when that comes to issues on human rights, on culture, on the arts. So that's also a very, very exciting component of my portfolio. So every day is really different. You step into the office and you hope to compile a report of a meeting the day before, for your head office and the business unit back home. But when you open your inbox, you get confronted with so many different aspects of issues and one's work, many different queries that come in, questions about life in South Africa, students who want to go and study there and need specific information, or teachers in the Netherlands or lecturers who ask us to come and do presentations or to ship them some goodies from South Africa that they can share with their students. So it's very, very exciting and very and very difficult, I think, to fully explain in the short time that we have. But essentially, it's a very exciting position to be in, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And like I mentioned to you, pursuing diplomacy has always been my goal since I was 16. So I consider myself very privileged and fortunate to be in this position.
Yes, Thank you so much for the information. Indeed, I personally find the diplomacy career pretty interesting. I was about to apply to it, but yeah, I was thinking maybe I will take it in the future. Now, Ms. Levelo, can you explain more about your role as a deputy ambassador?
The role of a deputy ambassador is to, first, you are assisting the ambassador accredited to the Netherlands. That's number one. Two, you become the head of the chancery. Head of the chancery meaning the head of this building you see as the South African Embassy on day-to-day running, from my section until the administrative and the consular section, and report to the ambassador. And also is when the ambassador is not in the country, traveling to another country, or maybe going to South Africa, I become the acting ambassador. So you become an all-rounder. You need to know from my work, you need also to know until the finance sections and also the visa issues and all those kind of things. So it mostly one of the senior positions that one can hold. Also not forgetting that you still have your day-to-day job that you are assigned to do it here. So you become a role player for everything. However, also in most instances, a deputy ambassador is the person that continue to enhance the relations within the two countries. In most instances, there are countries that appoint ambassadors that are not of a career diplomat, or there are countries, in this instance, like we are accredited to the international organizations here. You get that ambassador needs to be at the OPCW or at the international courts or any tribunal. I therefore step in maybe to have the meetings with the foreign ministry or any other government department. So we share those kind of roles between myself and the ambassador. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your answers, Mrs. Levelo. I'm sure that such a demanding job comes with a great number of challenges. So on this note, I wanted to know, what is diplomacy for you? What would you say are the most important traits necessary for working in the field of diplomacy and to perform your tasks? Mrs. Levelo, let's start with you this time, and then Mr. Hendricks can come after.
A diplomacy is an old kind of system that became communication between government and leadership. If you can remember how diplomacy worked in the olden days, is a diplomat was a person who became a special envoy from their country leader to another country leader. And in that way, before even we think of embassies being established, a diplomat will be able to transit from one country to the other just to deliver a letter, stay in those countries and get a response and return to their host country. So as a diplomat, diplomacy means a special skill or a person who will be able to build up the relationship between the two countries. And this is what our main role are here. Whether we are here as diplomats, we build our country on a bilateral relations that will include contacts between the two governments. Other one that Jamie and Elia indicate is we're building relations on our trade relations, on education, on all those kind of programs. That includes diplomacy, because more about that is there is a certain commitment that the two governments, the host country government and my country, which is South Africa, tend to agree on issues. So those kind of issues, before you see it on the news being televised, a diplomat who in that case will have the skill, will have the know-how, could have negotiated better to come to the agreement that you see the two leaders from two countries negotiating. That is the role of diplomacy in the modern world.
Indeed, being a good negotiator is actually a really helpful skill when you're starting the career of diplomacy. Now, Mr. Hendrick, what would you think about diplomacy and what are the most important traits necessary for working in this field? perform your tasks.
Yes, just to, Ms. Labello certainly gave a very comprehensive answer, and just perhaps to add a couple of aspects. Diplomacy is essentially, communicating and pursuing the priorities of your country and its government. And those national priorities find expression also in the country's, foreign policy. For instance, in South Africa's case, our kind of values and priorities are quite clearly that we need an equitable and peaceful global order, a respect for human rights, and a respect and adherence to international law. We also seek to better the fortunes and the lives, of course, of South Africans and Africans generally. So, for instance, economic diplomacy also plays an important role there. How do we develop our countries? How do we develop our continent so that our people have a better future? So with all of those aspects in mind, you go out and you pursue the work of your country abroad, and you engage with interlocutors and engage with issues that give expression to those priorities that your country has identified. So I think a clear understanding of your country's foreign policy as a diplomat is a very important aspect of your job. You need to know what the policy imperatives are, what it is that your country is trying to seek or achieve by having a representation in the country you're accredited to, right? So that's the primary task that we have. Of course, you also need to understand the global context. You need to understand geopolitics and your country's place in it, and your country's views on international matters, and of course also that of the country that you're placed in. What does being in the larger region mean for your placement there? And how can your country leverage the strengths and interests of that region and country to its advantage? But in the same breath, you also seek to cooperate internationally, right? So just apart from national interest, you also have international interests and global interests that you partner with countries on. And we've mentioned some of them as being human rights issues, climate change, for instance, and developmental aspects related to that. So there are various aspects we're involved in as diplomats. And I think the personal traits you certainly require is or are, an inquisitiveness for the environment you're in and the world at large, analytical ability. You need to analyze what certain decisions or communications by governments mean in the bigger context. You need to be able to write well, to articulate issues you've identified and inform your capital about those. And you also need very good interpersonal skills, because diplomacy is also very much about networking and reaching out to stakeholders and attending events. And, every person you meet is important, because you never know what issues you may work on together at a later stage or what common interests you may have. So just putting yourself out there, confidence perhaps also is built after time once you become more settled and more acquainted with your work. But some of the things I've mentioned are just some of the basics, and of course you need to have a high level of integrity, because trust is also very important. Because if you don't have trust or integrity as a diplomat, then the image of your country suffers, and the work and accomplishments you achieve suffer. So yes, with that said, I think that's just some additional aspects from my side.
Thank you very much. It's definitely interesting to hear about your roles, responsibility, the path that diplomacy have taken throughout history, stemming from just someone or delivering a letter to now this interplay between national interest and international cooperation is definitely something very interesting. And touching on that, the South African embassy here in the Netherlands also has a special role as a result of The Hague being the host of so many international organizations and tribunals. So, how has this changed the responsibilities and approaches to your jobs? How about let's start again with Mr. Hendricks this time, and let's follow with Mrs. Levelo, if that's all right.
No, it's fine.
Yes, as you've mentioned, we are also credited to all the legal and multilateral institutions here in The Hague. You would be aware, for instance, of the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, in which we serve on the executive committee, and our ambassadors represented there, and the rest of us as advisors. We also have, of course, accreditation to the International Criminal Court and the Permanent Court of Arbitration, as well as the Hague Conference on Private International Law. And yeah, and of course, all the mechanisms, the residual mechanisms for the tribunals of the 90s. So a very exciting place to be in. And our mission is what you call a hybrid mission, because we serve both bilateral relations and multilateral relations. It enables us, as I mentioned before, to kind of serve, both at the global level and cooperate with a number of countries on very interesting and important aspects, while at the same time, of course, dealing with all the bilateral interests. And so, of course, very important for South Africa, all the institutions here, because of our foreign policy tenets, which consider international cooperation and the rule of law to be very important. South Africa, of course, is punches above its weight in a lot of multilateral institutions, specifically for that purpose. So in our work also, we interact with those issues on a regular basis, and report to Capital on them and monitor all the different developments. So certainly being here, and of both of us also having legal backgrounds, but also having a legal counselor here in the embassy, allows us to have very stimulating debates, and views about certain aspects. I think that's what I will contribute from that point.
Okay. Just to add on what Mr. Hendricks indicated earlier, if you look at the principle of our foreign policy is based on Ubuntu principle, which means that I am because of you are. And human rights has also been at the center point of our foreign policy. And if you look at the formation of the ICC, South Africa played a critical role in the formation of the ICC, in building up the ICC, because of the principle of Ubuntu, as well as the principle of human rights that we actually take care of. We are playing pivotal role as well in regards to issues of human rights. If you look also on the OPTW, which is the proliferation of nuclear issues, we are one of the countries that we so open in how we deal with the management of nuclear, and as well as the disarmament issues. So those are the issues that actually become our center for our foreign policy when coming to multilateral issues. Thank you very much. It was just an addition from Jamian.
Thank you for your answers, Mr. Hendrick and Mrs. Lovelo. As you mentioned, the embassy is responsible for diplomatic engagement as well as providing legal advice on issues pertaining to the legal organization based in The Hague. Based on that, how do being former lawyers have helped in this particular responsibility? Again, if you want to start, Ms. Levelo, with replying this question, and then Mr. Hendricks, if you want to complement anything.
Okay. The issues on the multilateral level is not like a normal court. It's mostly issues related to country specifics. Okay. For example, if there is an interesting issue happening, is because a country will refer a certain person to an international court. So you are coming to an international court and appear in an international court based on a referral. Okay. The international court, looking into the jurisdiction, they will investigate into the matter. Okay. And once it goes into that, it will go to the pre-trial chamber to be investigated. In if they found the reasons and the grounds to prosecute, is then that the matter will be referred to the court for trial, and that will end up with prosecution and all the proceedings. So in a normal instance, is it goes per country's interest and how does your country stand for. Issues of human rights that become a center point as well. How do you support each other on issues of human rights? And it takes time for a matter to be referred to a court in The Hague. I will give you an example. Let's take an example where the matter first is discussed in the United Nations, which is New York, okay, at the Security Council. Sometimes it goes to Geneva at the Human Rights Council, okay? Before a decision can be made to say that we are referring a certain country to this kind of a forum or to this kind of a tribunal. So it's not like going to a police station and open up a case. It's issues that are getting to be discussed before it comes to The Hague. So if you see a trial that coming to The Hague, you will realize that sometimes it's years that people have been waiting for this person to appear in The Hague is because of those kind of procedures. And from legal background as a lawyer is it actually helps you to have both a legal mind, a political mind, and a diplomat. So you end up having some other issues that link or that overlap each other, because some other issues, though it might be of human rights, some becomes of a political interest, some also affect your relations as countries. So our issues end up being overlapping as we deal with issues and so forth. But it's also very interesting because it becomes of a global concern. It's not like one country acting against the other, but it becomes a decision made by multiple or many countries for a person to be referred to The Hague for appearance. Thank you very much.
Yes, perhaps I think certainly being an attorney and having dealt with primarily domestic law in South Africa, and a little bit later about I was dealing with international aspects in our foreign ministry. It's still very, very interesting whether it's you have developments at the national level or international level, and of course there's a lot of overlap as well, because you would know that when countries accede to international statutes or treaties that have established courts, the international courts, they usually have to domesticate the treaty so that it becomes national law also. So there's an interplay. You don't only have international law obligations in certain respects, but it also takes place at the national level. So if you're in any kind of violation of international law or your obligations in terms of international law, that also has national law consequences. So from that perspective, it's very interesting, and being here allows us to interact with various different issues across the multilateral bodies here, including the courts, and causes robust debate. And obviously from a legal perspective, but we also work in the realm of diplomacy, and states, of course, also act in their specific interests, and so one has to contextualize and analyze and try and understand why a certain view is taken on certain aspects, whether they be legal or not. But of course, we know the courts are independent, the judges are independent, and so that's a very separate and independent process. But of course, states play a role in the institutions because they discuss issues relating to its functioning, to its budgeting, and their general commitments towards having these institutions succeed and being really representative of our normative obligations and standards to which we agreed more than 75 years ago, and that is that there would be no impunity and that we would not face the scourges of war and destruction as we'd seen it before. And of course, that at the center of our international relations and international order is, of course, the respect for human rights and certain fundamental rights as enunciated and contained in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other human rights treaties. So from that perspective, it's always interesting to be here and see that interplay, and also to see countries give expression to their foreign policy and what they stand for. Because, of course, it's one thing to say I stand for these values, but it's always interesting to see where that plays out in the actual institutions, So that, as I've mentioned, particularly from a lawyer, but also diplomat perspective, it's a very fascinating arena to be in. So that makes especially The Hague a very, very interesting and special place.
Thank you for your answers, Ms. Lovelo, Mr. Hendrik. Indeed, being a law student myself, it's always exciting to hear how these skills and knowledge we acquire through our studies and our career shapes us into that professional position too. If we want to become a diplomat, it also becomes handy. Now, the following set of questions that is going to be asked by my colleague can be answered by either of you. So don't feel like, if you feel that you want to answer that question, just don't hesitate and you can just jump in.
Okay.
Thank you. So on this note, how would you describe the transition of being a former lawyer and working on a national level to then work on an international level as a diplomat and legal advisors in an international playfield?
Go, Jay.
Yeah, I think I've really touched on this a bit. So obviously the interplay between the national and the international, but also when you are a practicing lawyer just dealing with national issues and you kind of step into the diplomacy space, you also become much more aware and acute of things that play a role, like I said earlier, trying to understand different policies and different perspectives on different countries and understanding why they hold those views. That becomes a bit more evident because you would know that, for instance, the international law making process, and customary international law, requires state practice and opinio juris to kind of be evident before state actions can be considered customary international law and therefore accepted. But not always, states don't always accept or act according to certain rules, and so you must try and understand and navigate that space, because that also plays a role, when you negotiate about certain aspects, and gives you a broader understanding of how to approach matters and how to essentially, negotiate and find middle ground. So instead of, for instance, in law, things being really black and white, almost, not always, but for the most part, you can refer to statutes and you can refer to case law and know what the legal position is. Diplomacy is a little bit more complicated, but it's certainly as time goes on and as you read more and learn more and try and understand, countries' different position and policies, that's when you start to gain a better understanding of why states act the way they do or why they take certain positions on certain aspects. So that interplay for me has been certainly very, very interesting. And I think diplomacy also makes me a better lawyer, because you deal with different kinds of cultures and people and issues. So it really broadens your understanding of various aspects of law. In our daily work, sometimes you have issues relating to import, export duties, tax laws, double taxation agreements, and EU regulations about certifications, and so it's fascinating, and you learn constantly. You also learn about diplomatic law, so the kind of immunities that diplomats enjoy, or embassies and international organizations, and then of course also consular issues. You've got stranded citizens sometimes that you have to advise or assist, and their various laws also come into play and interact. So it's a very interesting space to be an attorney in, and it will certainly broaden your horizons and your interests in the very various aspects of both domestic and international law.
Thank you, Mr. Hendrik. That is very fascinating indeed. Now we would like to know as much of us. Well, as much of us, we are doing like our bachelor degree, and we're bachelor students of the International European Law. Most of us are thinking about pursuing a master degree in the future. So I would like to know how having a master degree have helped or influenced your diplomatic career. What would be your advice for students looking to pursue a master degree in the future?
From my side, I say that I think accreditation and enroll of diplomacy, it depends from country to country, but I will give you South Africa in this instance as an example because I'm from South Africa as well. The role of education and qualifications play an important role when coming to becoming a diplomat. One being, I know that the Netherlands doesn't have an honors level, but in South Africa you have two categories before you get to your master's level, which means it's your bachelor, it's your honors level, and then you get to your master's level. And in that, we have a stringent procedure when coming to enrollment, because it's when your qualification and your little bit of an experience post your higher education plays a role, because most of the people, they finish the university, but as well as you need to have some kind of in-service training that led you to be skillful in a work environment. So we have two sets of enrollment. One will be an assessment. You are invited to write an assessment, which is an overview of everything, whether South Africa or international. How do you know your country? How do you know South African involvement in the United Nations or maybe in human rights? Those kind of current issues. Secondly, it will be an interview. That makes you to enter just an academy. So you go, then after the two, if you are successful on the two forums, then you are invited to come to our diplomatic academy that takes you 2 years to qualify to be a diplomat. So you go to the academy, we call you a cadet, which means it's a student diplomat for 2 years. You are enrolled there, you are given all the sort of training. And I think that's when you realize that being a diplomat, you just, as Damien say, that you become, you end up multitasking and doing with a lot of different things. Even if we are posted or based in the Netherlands, but there are some other things that only doesn't involve the Netherlands, though we are in the Netherlands and we need to know about it. So those are the things. And once you're done with your cadet training, and then it's then that you become a fully fledged public servant and called a diplomat. So for me, I will say that a master's level, it will be another springboard for most of the students that wants to become a diplomat, because it shows how extensive educated you are to be able to diversify, but also a diplomat becomes a researcher and analyst, and also an analyst on the other side is how far can you research and analyze, being able to advise your head office, because being here on the ground, whatever I see, my head office will have a clear picture if I give them that through a report and have an accurate analysis or a good analysis. So in that, I think having a master's program is one type of a skill that can help you in your research and your analysis method to be able to report to your head office once you become a diplomat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's definitely very interesting. And I'm sure most of our audience today appreciates it, because we are in that stage where we're trying to decide whether to not take a master or not. But now, moving a little bit away of your personal careers, we are also very curious about the presence of South Africa in their international ambit. We also know that South Africa is often referred as a rainbow nation. So, in your opinion, how does this interplay of ethnicities reflect on national policies and international policies of South Africa?
Jay, you want to take that in the meantime?
Yes. No, that's a very good and very interesting question. As you rightly mentioned, we are a rainbow nation. If you're familiar with our past, you will know that South Africa suffered for many, many decades under apartheid, which was the legal segregation of persons of colors, which really had, of course, a very negative impact on non-white populations within South Africa. We couldn't go to the same beaches. We couldn't study to the same level as white counterparts. So you can imagine that caused then a lot of inequality in our country, a lot of pain because of the atrocities that were also committed in that time. And so, you know, when we emerged from that very difficult period with our first democratic election in 1994, which is just about 27 years ago, so our democracy is still relatively young. Of course, the first thing we sought to do under the leadership of our then President Nelson Mandela was to forge a new trajectory for our country, was to unite our people in a non-racial way, so that we could live together and build a new country, a democratic dispensation that is everything that our past was not. Obviously, a very ambitious goal, you know, with deep and painful legacies which are still felt today. If you look at development in our countries, you know, some aspects, some parts of our country are very, very developed, first world, one would say, and other parts are really, really underdeveloped. And of course, the ones who bear most of that brunt are still, you know, Black South Africans and colored South Africans and racial minorities who were disadvantaged for all that time. So when we then adopted our constitution, a very progressive and a very, you know, exemplary constitution by international standards, even for developed countries' standards, we made sure that you know, all rights are respected, that there's you know, proper access to resources, especially for those who were previously disadvantaged. But our constitution, of course, really places emphasis on non-discrimination on grounds of race, on gender, sexual orientation, and disability, and all those other aspects. And of course, all of that also finds expression then in our foreign policy, because as I mentioned at the outset, countries' foreign policy are usually guided by their national values and priorities and kind of how they wish to see the world. What's always fascinating for me is when you're part of a South African delegation at the United Nations or any other multilateral body, our representation is so diverse. We've got white South African diplomats and black and colored and Indian and other minorities, and that's really representative of our country. And so often other delegations are confused because they can't pinpoint and say, oh, you're from this country or from that country based on how you look. We in our international engagements we promote inclusivity, the peaceful settlement of disputes because of what we've had to overcome. And build together as people from different backgrounds, different cultures. And we also, are very unequivocal on issues related to any aspects of colonialism and apartheid and segregation of people. And for instance, in the UN, we are a pen holder on the resolution against racism internationally. So that's how we give expression to kind of what our priorities are back home. So of course we've achieved a great deal in a short time. 27 years is not a long time. We are a very young democracy, and we've seen our society transform. But of course, there still remain challenges. There's still challenges of unemployment and poverty and inequality, which still is indicative of our painful legacies. But we try every day, and it's really exciting to be, especially a South African diplomat, because our policies are so progressive and so inclusive. I mean, at the Peace and Security Council of the UN, in our last tenure of the last 2 years, which ended in December 2020, we advocated strongly for the role of women in peace and security. So gender equality is really, really important to us, the peaceful settlement of disputes, as I've mentioned. So we take all of those aspects, also of development of youth and their access to education and skills, and we go out into the world and we try and bring back some of the benefits and the dividends to our people in South Africa.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Hendrik. Indeed, I think South Africa is a leading example in this matter, and it also could serve as an example even to my own country, Peru, about recognizing every people. They are unique from the parts they are, or from the country they come. We have seen that South Africa is also a leading example in the field of gender equality to countries in Africa and not only, particularly since the adoption of the 1996 Choice on Termination of Pregnancy Act on legalizing abortion. Due to that, we would love to ask specifically, what is the current South African government's position with regards to gender equality?
In regard to gender equality, South African government have a prime position, and as well as the act in regard to that. As a woman in South Africa, there is a policy that calls women empowerment and gender parity when coming to deployment. Not only just to empower women, but also is women that qualifies to be in certain positions. So when coming to that, we are having a clause that it must be 50-50 when coming to representation. Not forgetting that actually women in the world are in majority as compared to men. So which means if we go on a practical way of doing a head count, women should be in majority as compared to men. But South Africa said 50-50 when coming to deployment. In the public sector, That is prime role when coming to women representation, whether in the senior or a junior management level or any other kind of things, as well as in private companies. The government look into that when coming to establishment of a company, whether on a senior position or going down, but also even if those old companies that were formed before the issue of women empowerment was on the table or being discussed, is now government is encouraging those old companies to come with a policy when coming to women empowerment within the companies. So we are trying to move forward when coming to that. And unfortunately, it's not an excuse. It must be done as government requires it to be done. And it must be visible in many ways to be, not because of just empowerment, but also you will realize that based on the apartheid is women were the most people that were deprived. One, being an issue of whether black or white or colored, all women were not supposed to go to work. They were supposed to stay at home. That's why in South Africa, we are one of the countries that celebrate women. On the 9th of August every year, we have what we call Women's Day, which is a holiday in South Africa. But historically, when you look on that day, there were 4 women to 5 women that set up across the race and come up with a march to go and protest against then the apartheid government that women are deprived in South Africa. Women were not allowed to work. Women were supposed to stay at home. Women, when they go to work, it was more of a domestic worker than any other thing. So they stand against the apartheid government, irrespective of color, irrespective of race, and they stood for the women's right. That was 9 August 1956. And from that onward, we are still calling again as South African women for more empowerment, for putting more women in critical or strategic position, not because it's an empowerment, but also it's because they qualify for it. And politically, you will realize that in most instances where women are leading, there is less hunger, there is more solutions. So why can't we have more women in politics to save this world than having, I'm sorry to say it, a lot of men that more egos and more other things are running, forgetting that actually there are children that need to eat at home. So why can't we make this world a better place? If we want to defeat hunger, there is a mother that understands that children need to eat at home. Being a politician as a mother, you will understand that, okay, fine, though I want to go on a fight, but can I continue to make this world a better place for our future, for the children? So in South Africa, women empowerment is not an excuse. It's a government agenda, is there, and we continue to strive for it. Even if you look in our parliament, we have more women in parliament, we have more women in politics, we have more women in leadership as well for ministers and so forth. And as well as other big companies in South Africa, you get women in strategic position, and we are still striving. We are not saying that we have arrived. We are still striving because if you look into the continent, actually, Rwanda has surpassed South Africa when coming to women empowerment and women in strategic position. So we want to do best because we have championed the issue of women's rights in any spheres. So anyway, and you will realize that even now when we talk about the United Nations, our ambassador in the United Nations is a woman. That shows that we have trust in women in leadership, in critical position, as well as making decisions on behalf of the government in the country. Thank you, Gustavo.
Thank you very much. It's so inspiring to hear this word and listening to a nation encouraging women and having such a strong position in this area. At least for me, it's always something that I look with much admiration. Now, if it's okay with everybody, because of the time limits, we would like to we would like to open the floor for our attendees to ask some questions So for those watching from YouTube, feel free to add your questions in the chat, and we will also ask those questions. And yes, please be aware that priority will be given to the ones raising their hands. You're welcome to introduce yourselves before asking your questions, or just type it in the chat and we will read it out loud. So we'll begin now.
I think no one is raising their hand, but there are some questions in the chat section, so I'm going to read it out loud. This is a question from Altamash Khalil. He says, what is the impact and importance of having the Southern Africa Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union? What sort of values does this type of agreement promote?
I will start by saying that the European Union itself is got a partnership agreement with the African Union, and South Africa is only country in the continent that's got a partnership agreement with the European Union. Strategically, if you look at trading partners, you will realize that South Africa is more economically advanced when coming to some of the African countries. But also you will take it from the perspective that it might be that the European Union as well was looking for the strategic position in signing the agreement, because South Africa, being a country, is also a member of the Southern African Customs Union, which is the oldest customs union in the world. So it also gives them access to other part of the market, being a partner with South Africa. It has expanded our trade as well. If you look into the European Union, because South Africa, it used to be, or to a certain extent, is still a gateway to the African continent. Most of the products coming from Europe, it goes through South Africa into the continent. And thirdly is you look at the services that South Africa is offering when coming to banking and customs, you will not compare to some other parts of Africa. So we pride ourselves in services we offer in the business services, in banking services, as well as doing business with the world. We have proven to be one of the countries that an investor can trust to do business in the world. So I will say that having European Union as our strategic position, it also helps us because it's based on the historical linkages we have with Europe, as well as being the member of the Southern African Customs Union, which is the oldest customs union in the world, and it gives access to the European Union to other part of the market within the southern part of Africa.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Yes,
add
please.
to that. No, absolutely correct. It's quite important because it provides access for our goods to new markets or more consumers, and helps in the development of certain sectors within the Southern African Union, because SADC itself has 16 members and is a free trade area. And so the EPA, European Partnership Agreement, provides certain duty-free access of some of our products to the EU region. And we are, of course, very excited and elated that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was concluded and signed by all African countries at the beginning of this year, and which will see African countries trade with each other, which has been very minimal up to this point. Intra-Africa trade is approximately at 13-14%, which is very low. Most of our products are exported abroad. So with this free trade agreement across our continent, and access to 1.2 billion people and a sizable African economy, will help us to develop and industrialize faster and sustainably. So we're quite excited about that development. So Africa's potential is still very great. We've achieved a great deal in the past decades, and more you see Africa, starting to play the role that it deserves to in trade and in international relations generally.
Thank you so much. It's really impressive and an incredible responsibility to be a bridge in between continents and a gateway to Africa in general in the trade market. Now, I would first like to ask, we have quite some questions on the chat, but we've reached the hour limit. So I wanted to ask if you mind answering a couple of these questions, or
Okay. Now we can proceed and save time on the other side.
Thank you so much then. So our next question in the chat comes from Zainab, and the question is, what in your opinion is the importance of the relationship between South Africa and the Netherlands, and how does South Africa benefit from it, and vice versa?
Our relationship with the Netherlands comes a long way. As you remember, the story started, or the relationship started in 1652 when one of the Dutch person, which by the name of Jan van Riebeeck, ended up in the Shores, which is close to Jamin's home in Cape Town. So that's where the relationship emanated. Bringing it fast forward is, as of current, the Netherlands is one of a strategic partner to South Africa. When I say a strategic partner, is we have relationship with them that we can rely on them. Being a strategic partner is South Africa is benefiting a lot, so is the Netherlands and the European Union, of the fresh produce being imported from South Africa into the Netherlands. We are supplying from your apples, your citrus, your oranges, and many more, and we are expanding beyond that. However, we also want to learn more from the Netherlands, as you are quite aware that the Netherlands, when coming to environment, is one of the countries that are already into the renewable energy. Whereas in South Africa, our energy sector is depending on coal. We still use the coal and coal mines and so forth. But as a signatory to the Paris Agreement, is we are forced to follow or to go into the agreement of the Paris Agreement and implement it. And we are learning a lot from the Netherlands when coming to renewable energy. So that is why we are saying that we are strategic partners when coming to the Netherlands on the bilateral relations and other things, and trade as well. On the multilateral, when we talk the global governance, we cooperate a role on human rights, on security councils, and as well as on other issues when coming to peace and security within our continent as well. So if you may realize that some of the Dutch military were part of the NATO or the EU mission to Mali, whereas South Africa was leading into the Mali peacekeeping as well. So we cooperate a lot when coming to peacekeeping, human rights, Security Council, and issues of mutual interest that takes us beyond that. If you look at our issues of education partnership, smaller things of education, research, and so forth, we do partners as well. So our relationship with the Netherlands, as I earlier said, is of strategic importance, and we benefit from each other both ways.
Thank you, Mrs. Lebello. There is the last question comes from Mara. She asks, making reference to South Africa's history undergoing a significant reform and achievement after decades of international isolation, as Mr. Henry explained, how would you describe South African values and contribution to the formulation of international law and the improvement of the respect for its provision?
Jay, you can put it?
Yes, no, certainly, when we became a democratic state, we immediately emphasized the importance of the adherence to international law, because it was, in many sense, multilateral institutions like the United Nations, like the non-aligned movement and other blockings that assisted to keep the South African issue on the international agenda. And that was, calling for an end to apartheid and calling for sanctions and embargoes on weapons sales, etc. So we certainly realized the role that played. And even as early as 1961, I think it was, the early 1960s, Ethiopia and Liberia took the South African government to the ICJ in a dispute about its treatment of then Southwest Africa, which is today Namibia, and essentially, the mandates that the South African government had under international law and under the UN Charter, and whether that was being violated by the export of apartheid essentially to that part of the world. So international law, played a very important part. So it only follows then that we really respected in our democracy. We have joined or with various cases as delivering statements in, for instance, the ICJ on certain matters of importance to us. As Olita said, we've been instrumental in the drafting of the Rome Statute and the establishment of the ICC. We have served 3 terms on the United Nations Security Council, and they were pen holders of various important resolutions. So our commitment is really evident. And so when we engage with our partner countries and with multilateral organizations, we do so in the spirit of cooperation, and finding solutions and specific settlements of disputes and preventing impunity for injustices, and promoting the rule of law. That in essence nobody is above the rule of law. So in various aspects, the respect for international law and our contribution to it, I think, is very valued and very recognized by the international community. We of course also make contributions to the multilateral institutions and legal institutions here, and that's also signals, of course, our commitment to an equitable and rules-based international system.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hendricks. I have to say it is amazing to see what the reform has done in so little amount of time, and how this has propelled not only national reform, but the way it's brought into international affairs is just amazing to me. I have to say I'm very much impressed. But yes, one last question from the chat. So the last question is from Maria. Hello, I am an international law student, and I'm really concerned about the current pandemic's influence on international diplomacy. Do you think it has a real potential of having a long-lasting effect, and how would it be conducted?
Let me briefly say, and Jemino will add after, to say, the international law will still prevail. The practices will still remain. Yes, the pandemic will change on how other things are done. But the most important thing in diplomacy is contact than visual. That's one thing that people need to realize, to say that when you become a diplomat, you will realize that some other things you can say it over the phone, and then some other things you can't say over the phone. You just need to be there to talk to the people, and some other matters, though is contact, it will be off record. So diplomacy will still prevail. International practices when coming to diplomacy will remain, because on how diplomacy is conducted. The international forums where it requires the international law, I think that the practices will still be maintained. It's unfortunately that this pandemic, for me, with my own personal opinion, I said that it's another addition to a new flu, because if you look at the sequence of pandemics in the world, you had your flu, you had your bronchitis, you have your pneumonia, you have your tuberculosis. This is also another thing added to our list of pandemics that come. We still have to strive it, go beyond it, but it's here to stay. And what do we do to live with corona amongst us as one of the viruses that we have discovered in the 21st century? So as an international law student, I will say that keep that hope, because it doesn't mean that the world is coming to an end. There's still going to be the United Nations tomorrow. There will still be the ICC. There will still be the ICJ. There will still be all the international forums. And that is unfortunate that the pandemic come into this age of hope when people are hoping, but let's continue to hope for the best. And tomorrow might be better than today. And that is how we need to move. Jay, do you want to add on that?
Yes, of course, the situation is not ideal. We miss interacting with colleagues from other embassies, but also your stakeholders. And you miss the nuances of certain developments and the soft aspects of communication, which is obviously difficult to read through virtual platforms. That being said, we still have achieved a great deal in the past year, and we've adapted and we call it e-diplomacy. We've gone into online platforms, and in multilateral institutions and in our bilateral work, it's gone ahead. We negotiate with countries, we negotiate and collaborate with our partners on these platforms, and while it's not ideal, I do think it's brought also a number of opportunities, because now we have more stakeholders we can include in our discussions. People from back home, from various sectors in South Africa, private, public, academia. You can now give them access to their counterparts, so to say, and interesting insights that take place in these forums. And I think you also may have benefited with the availability, perhaps, of ambassadors who've participated in these diplomacy days. So there are some benefits, but of course, yeah, it's been a challenging time, but also one in which we've seen countries cooperate at the WHO, at the UN, at the African Union level. We've really come together and tried to find a way out of the pandemic. And yes, it's not a perfect system, and yes, we have concerns about vaccine nationalism. We still, gone to the G20, gone to the UN, gone to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, where South Africa and India have led this initiative to have IP waived on vaccines, so that developing countries can have access to it. And also at the African Union, through the facility, the ATT's facility we've established there during our tenure as chair of the African Union last year, we secured access to 1 billion vaccines, So that requires a lot of country collaboration and a lot of grit and negotiation and goodwill, and we've pulled it off. So I do think, despite the challenges, we're doing pretty okay, and I think we will hopefully emerge better and stronger from this, from an international cooperation perspective, for sure.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful indeed. I want to thank you and Ms. Levelo for your answers. Unfortunately, this will have to be the last question, and it's from us, the organizers, due to time restraints. So what would be your final piece of advice for a student looking to pursue a career in diplomacy?
For any other person, diplomacy is a calling. You need to serve your country with all the loyalty, because being a diplomat, you don't serve any other person but the interest of your country. And this is what students need to know. And it might not be the good times of your country. It might be the shady time of your country. But at the time when you become a diplomat, you must know that you are a country by yourself. So when a person see you, they see your own country. Like you are from Mexico, they see Mexico. Okay? They don't see Gustavo, they see Peru, because they will say that diplomat from Peru, that diplomat from Mexico. We even forgot your name because we attach you to your country. That is the interesting part of a diplomat, is you put yourself in your country's feet than your personal interest. So your country first and your personal interest after. That is how diplomats are. As students, I will say that continue to study hard. Diplomacy is all about research and how deep you can dig and how good you can make your country shine. You need to know your country in and out. You need to know what your country needs. Hence, I says that it's only for the best interest of your country, nothing else. You don't stand for somebody else, you stand for your country. If me and Jamie were sitting here today, if we go and dig deep, I will just give an example. We are looking into the poultry associations with the Netherlands and poultry interest with the Netherlands. Is all we do is how can the Dutch business invest in South Africa? One, not just to bring money, but once a Dutch investor goes to South Africa, you create jobs. Okay, so many people will be employed by this factory. So many people will have food on their table. So many revenues will be generated. This company will be paying revenues to my government. This company will be selling 1, 2, 3, 4. But the product, at the end of the day, it will have a brand that says that made in South Africa. You need to take pride of it. I always tell people that I'm in the Netherlands, and proudly so, I will buy every South African wine on the shelves. Because for me, buying a South African wine here or any other South African product is, I know back home it generates revenues, it creates jobs, it puts food on the table. So being a student, looking forward to become diplomats, study hard, know that when you turn and ask your government to be a diplomat is nothing else but your country, and serve your country with pride and with loyalty, and patriotism shall stand irrespective of the challenges you find in your country. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just add, perseverance. Getting into foreign ministries is not an easy task, and likely with, subdued economic growth for the foreseeable future, may be difficult with the strain of government finances. But, you do things on the way to prepare you for that point when you do get that call or get that letter of invitation. So study as much, try and get experience in the field, whether it's in NGOs or IGOs or multilateral institutions, and read outside of the scope of your courses, try and have a real global understanding and challenge yourself. Because when the call does come, the expectation is going to be high for you to know a number of things. But also work on yourself, understand your needs and what you want to achieve with your career and what you see for your future, and try and be the best person you can become as well. Learn to balance things and learn to be also true to yourself. So with those parting shots, yes, I really enjoyed this interaction and answering your questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your questions, and thank you for your answers, Ms. Levelo and Ms. Hendricks. We can already tell you the feedback that we're getting on social media and in this chat is amazing. Everybody is impressed with this session and it's finding it extremely interesting and informative. So thank you so much.
To close, to close, I think I speak for everyone when I say that this was an amazing event. On behalf of the university, the Hague University of Applied Sciences, the International Law Student Association, the Hague Chapter, we would once again like to thank the Deputy Ambassador, Ms. Lovelo, and the Third Secretary Political, Mr. Hendricks, for giving us this honor to engage in such captivating conversation. Everything that was discussed has been very eye-opening and definitely something very interesting. It was a real pleasure organizing this event, having a first-hand interaction with the vibrant and inspiring culture of South Africa, which definitely, I'm pretty sure now, not only me, but everyone see them with great admiration.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gustavo. Thanks, Sophia.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.